So great to see a good turnout, particularly as we had an event last week that had a good turnout. So yeah, we're getting weekly OREF events, which is really good. And it turns out this is the only Hustings the guys are telling me, so that's really good. So interesting, only Orkney Hustings anyway. So yeah, so the reason we put this forward, so OREF have created a manifesto, which is, there's some copies at the back that I see some people have picked that up. It's on our website, so if you want to have a read of what we've asked the candidates have all seen the manifesto. We sent it to them. It focuses on some points that we think we would like to see coming forward in the next Parliament. So it'll be interesting for us all to hear what the potential candidates think their party or themselves can deliver on that manifesto, and we want them to deliver on it, and we'll hold them to it. That's the point. You know, they'll be here in a few years' time, and we'll be back at them again and saying, here's the points that OREF raised, and this is what you said at the event. So we'll make sure that we follow that up. So for this evening, the sort of logistics of this evening, I'm going to chair it, as you probably noticed. Each candidate will get 3 minutes to do an introduction, absolutely precisely 3 minutes. Neil Kermode, if you know Neil Kermode at all, he's very precise on timing. And at 1 minute, he's going to stick a bit of paper in the air. It does say 1 minute to go on it, but if you can't read it when he does that, you know you've got a minute left, and then we'll cut you off, even if you're mid-sentence. I remember doing a Hustings once in Stromness, and Alistair Carmichael was speaking at this Hustings and went on for 10 minutes, and I couldn't get him bloody stopped. It was terrible. So that isn't going to happen tonight. I'm going to be more strict. So you'll be halfway through, I'll stand up. And if that doesn't work, the OREF board will come and muscle you out of the place or something. So you've got that. Neil's going to give you that. And then really, it's an open evening. Then it's really for people to ask questions from the floor. We, as the board, have picked up a few questions, particularly on the manifesto. This is an energy Hustings, so we would like any of the questions to have an energy element to it, if possible. You know, we will, if we don't want to get into too many random things, fishing or whatever, unless there's an energy element to it. That's important to us as the OREF Hustings. So that's what we want to do. So we're very lucky to have 4 of the 6 candidates here this evening. Unfortunately, the Green candidate, Chris Lease, was going to be here, but because of all this ferry disruption, he couldn't get back from Caithness. He's in Caithness, couldn't get booked on the boat. So that's an issue that we've got in Orkney, as a lot of people here. We also got a reply from the Reform candidate. I'm just going to read that out. So he said, "Thank you for your invitation, but as mine and my party's views are not on net zero and renewables are contrary to you and your members, I see little value in attending when anything I say is going to be hotly disputed." So he kindly declined for coming this evening. So I just thought I'd read that out for fairness across the piece. So that's it. That's the plan for the evening. And so I think we'll just get underway, and we'll just work from Jamie to the other end of the table, and you've got your 3 minutes starting now.
I'm not sure how I would respond to the candidate's point. I'm not sure our policies always align, but I think we'll certainly try and speak as much as we can about it. I'm probably not going to take the 3 minutes. I might do now, but I suppose I just wanted to make the point that because there obviously has been quite a lot in the press in the last few years, certainly, that the Scottish Conservatives and the Conservatives more generally are not against the energy transition. What we concerns with is probably the pace of change and how that's going to impact. And I think there's also concerns that we have around a lack of clarity about, firstly, how it's going to be delivered, but also the impact. We've seen, obviously, the Scottish Government miss its targets. We've seen probably a lack of clarity on who's going to pay and how much is actually going to be paid by households. And I think, I've always rather felt there's been a wider issue around needing a more honest approach from government, from local council, from both governments, from local councils, right across the board, on actually how we meet the energy needs of the UK, both business and domestic, and also how we therefore generate that. And I'm not sure we've ever had that proper conversation. Our manifesto actually isn't out yet, but I think one of the things I know that we will be focusing on is something that does align with the manifesto that you, as OREF, have put together, which is about local control and local communities having a say. And I think that's been extremely important. In fact, I know the manifesto highlights in its first line the Energy Act, the Orkney Energy Act, and the community as a whole benefit from such development. And that's something that we're concerned isn't happening, certainly in large parts of Scotland and large parts of the Highlands and Islands area that I represent, and hasn't happened too much. And so that's something that we're very much concerned about, and we want to make sure will be part of our manifesto. In terms of the OREF manifesto, I think there are some areas that I can agree with. There are some areas that I would want to see a little bit more information, and I think there's some areas where I would have some concerns, certainly on the impact. But hopefully, we'll be hearing a lot more about that today and hearing from you and colleagues. But I think that's probably where we sit.
Thank you, Jamie.
Yep. Good. Can I add my thanks to OREF for organising the hustings, but also for preparation of the manifesto. I think it's long been accepted that Orkney are the energy islands. I think our track record in terms of innovation, trying things, not always things that work out, but there's probably as much learning from that as there is from the things that go right. But the development of ideas, I think, is crucial, as Jamie kind of alluded to, and I think as ran through the text of the response from Reform, the debate around net zero, the debate around the development of renewables has changed quite markedly over the last few years. I think public support is still there, but the way in which we as politicians engage in this debate, I think, does need to change and reflect that. I think fundamentally some of, again, what Jamie's alluding to in terms of community benefit, ownership, resilience is part of the response to that changed debate. I think here in Orkney, not least because of the Orkney Act 1974. I think our ability to retain more of that control, to do things rather differently, is greater than it is perhaps for some other communities. But at the moment, I don't think we're realising that benefit. I think if you look at even some of the points that were being made in relation to Orkney Waters, in more recent times, the Scottish Government had brought forward proposals to localise a lot of those decisions, but exempted and took out of that process Scotland, which essentially is where the large part of the revenues were to be secured. I think the point made in the manifesto too around public procurement points to the role that both local authorities, but I think also Scottish Government and probably UK Government have to play. There's much discussion around local content. The definition of that seems to vary from administration to administration. And the training, the capacity building here locally, I see that we've led the way in terms of the transition to low and zero emission vehicles. But I think what we're seeing at the moment is are obstacles being placed in the way of that, sometimes from a misunderstanding about what is available here in Orkney. Ian and I were discussing this just before we got underway. But nevertheless, I think there are issues there that we need to address if we're not to see a halt put on a transition that I think Orkney has led the way on. As with Jamie, there are a couple of issues maybe around the Orkney Energy Agency, amendments to council tax provisions, which I think we would need to tease out a wee bit more. But I think OREF's to be congratulated on coming forward with ideas to help us develop the transition and take it through the next phase at a time where I think the political climate is more challenging than it's been for a while.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Well, I'd just echo the thanks to OREF for getting this meeting together and getting this manifesto together. And obviously thanks to yourselves for making the effort to turn up tonight. Now, I feel there's a certain degree of asymmetry here because we've got two heavyweights in the sense of, well, in the political sense of MSPs, who are obviously going to be fairly knowledgeable about policy as discussed in the Scottish Parliament. And we've got Robert, who through his work with Thaw, which is of great value, obviously is quite well up to speed with energy issues as well. Now, My position here is I'm just an average guy who decided to stand for Parliament, but purely incidentally, I was on the Labour Party's Scottish Policy Forum and involved in some of the policies to do with developing our manifesto. Now, obviously, there's a limit to what I can say because I'm in the same position as Jamie that our manifesto hasn't actually come out yet. But there are a couple of ideas, one of which will appear in the Arcadian the week after, the week after, I think it's a week after next, but I've just sent the article in today. There's also another thing that I'd like to float, but I'll leave that for later in the programme. Now, we are, speaking generally, in a very tough situation. We're in the unusual position of repeating 2 decades. The 1970s, with all the problems of energy suddenly becoming very expensive and staying that way for a while. And we also have basically the 1930s repeating itself here. We've already had 2 fairly substantial wars. The first, obviously, Ukraine, which put energy prices through the roof. And now Trump's actions in Iran, and nobody knows how that's going to end, but it's not going to go well. And again, energy prices through the roof. So it's a pretty bleak situation to look at going forward. And nobody quite knows how it's going to work out. But I do have a few ideas about what might be possible. So I think that's enough from me. Robert?
I'm going to stand up or I'll just fidget. Yeah, thanks very much, Laura, for inviting us along. It's unusual when we not sitting in the audience listening to somebody, but if you bear with me, I'll try not to be too long-winded. I think I just want to put up front that on Monday, John Swinney stated that on day one of the new SNP government, that he'll demand power over energy to be transferred to the Scottish Parliament so that we can cut bills, protect jobs and unlock investment. I think his line is that if Westminster won't bring their bills down, then they should get out of the way and let a government that will, and I would love to be part of that government. So having said that, when my 14-year-old self wrote a history project on the development of electricity in Orkney back in 1984, little did I know how much stress that topic would bring to future me. Fighting energy companies and a weak regulator, I'm going to say it, and a weak regulator for a living is bad for your health. But more to the point, the UK energy system has done economic and social harm to our community and everybody in it. This needs to end. Folk in energy-rich Orkney should all be energy-rich. That was the pledge by the Hydro Board Chairman Tom Johnson when he spoke in Kirkwall in May 1946 about a complete revolution in the outlook and possibilities of life and prosperity when electricity came to Orkney, or when the Hydro Board came to Orkney. But only 6 years after I wrote that project, the Tories privatised our electricity, and the system, unbundled into generation, transmission, distribution and supply, is broken and it's damaging our life. Underinvestment by the Tories, the Lib Dems and Labour means that infrastructure needs urgent upgrade and expansion, and we're paying for it through our bills. Don't take my word for it. Just the other week, David Alferty of Citizens Advice Scotland was asked by the BBC Sunday show if energy systems work for consumers. It doesn't. It's absolutely broken, completely and utterly broken, he said. While we often talk about energy as an economic and a market issue, which is how Westminster views it, fundamentally for us, said David, it's a social issue. He was talking my language. Being able to keep the lights on, being able to heat your home to an adequate level, being able to cook their next meal. These are essentials that too many folk are going without these days. I shouldn't walk into a house in renewably energy-rich Orkney and find folk turning off their storage heaters and instead burning imported gas and portable heaters. My link with OREF began when I was reporting for Orkney Today between 2003 and 2010. As a reporter, I suggested to Alex Hammond when he opened emails the 85 of test site.
Sorry, Robert, that's your 3 minutes up. I said it was going to be hard, and I am going to be hard. So thanks, and you maybe get a chance to finish it in one of the questions as you go forward. But so we're just going to go on to questions from the floor, and I would ask the candidates to be kind of succinct in the answer. We don't want, again, the Alistair Carmichael thing where you stand for 10 minutes. But equally, for people's on the floor, I also try and keep your questions succinct, and so that we can get a conversation going and give all the candidates a chance to answer. So if we can try and follow that up. There is a roving mic as usual. So if somebody's asking a question, put your hand up and the mic will come. It's a very civilised Hustings this, because the candidates will have to also get the microphone, and yeah. So I think the first one's coming from our chair, Neil. Yeah.
Yeah, no, thanks, Ian. By the way, gentlemen, you didn't introduce yourselves, but it would be good next time round just for. I'm sure people probably know who you are, but anyway, just looking at some of the questions that we posed. One particularly was about affordability, and we've touched on some of those items. I'd just like to give the room the benefit of what we've said. We said the present fuel efficiency of Orkney is poor. Private housing is generally of a lower standard than the public sector. However, even that is barely adequate for the coming challenges of climate change. OREF believes that it's iniquitous that multinational companies are extracting value from the county before satisfying the community's needs for affordable energy, either through reducing energy demand or else reducing the overall cost. OREF would like to see the Scottish and UK governments support the improvement of housing stock in both the private and public sectors, ensure all energy-hungry activities that serve the county, ferries, planes, housing, terrestrial transport, all make fuel use the top priority in procurement, and find a means to mobilise local wealth to invest in fuel efficiency. The question is, what measures will the candidates propose to support the improvement of housing stock in both the public and private sectors?
Okay. Rob, since you've got the microphone, you can crack on first.
So, yeah, it's no secret that I want to solve fuel poverty. And if affordable warmth is the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow that I'm kissing, I'll do it as hard as I can with my 2 hip replacements. I welcome the Scottish Fuel Poverty Advisory Panel recommendation to the Scottish Government earlier or late last year that islands and rural communities should have a specific and more focused and coordinated approach for tackling fuel poverty with clear leadership and enhanced resources. That's all their words. So I've already encouraged discussions between Orkney Islands Council and the advisory panel to see how that might happen, and I'll be keen to pursue this within the Scottish Government where relevant if I'm there. Mary McCallan, when I asked a question at the SNP campaign conference the other week, rightly highlighted that programmes that the Scottish Government have are already controlled locally, the area-based scheme and the Warmer Homes Scotland scheme. However, there might be more that we can do to tailor how we tackle fuel poverty more efficiently in Orkney, and I welcome Mary's willingness to look at better ways that might be identified. Immediate thoughts on that when I circulated this with colleagues locally was that we could do with funding for repair and funding for local retrofit skills capacity building, with additional capacity buoyed by additional long-term funds for repairs and upgrades, because I think we can see that the underspend on some of these schemes is because it's annually put forward, and the real restrictions, the weather window not being the least of them in Orkney. So that's all right. I think that making local energy advice services statutory funded would be another thing, and we're looking at your Orkney Energy Agency idea there too, and that would ensure that households are supported in the longer term and would probably be the most cost-effective additional resource.
Yeah. Thanks, Robert.
Okay. Well, there's quite a lot there. Housing is something that is very much in Labour's mind at the moment. Some of you may have come across my leaflet which came out in February and which mentions the Westminster government's 15 billion warm home plan. Now, that's a very general sort of statement in there. it'll be interesting to see how the details work out, but Labour is committed to improving insulation from a national Westminster level. Now, you've also got to consider housing, new builds. Now, if you have a new build house, it's probably going to have great insulation and a heat air pump, exactly the sort of house you want nowadays. Labour in Scotland has committed to build 125,000 new homes over the course of the next Parliament, and we'll be doing what we can to improve local government finance, including reform of council tax. We'll aim to put more money into social housing. We'll aim to improve planning, basically getting more planners and a central planning hub that will help councils out with awkward or complicated projects. And we'll also invest in further education, because you're not going to be able to build new houses unless you have skilled workers in all the building trades who can see a future going into an industry that is going to grow if Labour's plans come to fruition. Now, there is also a serious question about the energy costs. And I think I don't want to go on too long. I'll leave my suggestion until a later question that fits in with it. So that will, I think, will be okay.
Okay, thank you very much. Yep. Thanks. I mean, just picking up the transport point, first of all, I think there's no doubt, obviously we're seeing some of that coming through in the work on sustainable aviation at the moment. There's also been work in relation to hydrogen ferries, but there's a ferry procurement process. I mean, in a sense, if we're not building that fuel efficiency process into those discussions, then we really are missing a trick and baking in problems for the future. I think in terms of housing, the question is whether you bring down the cost or bring down demand. I mean, I think you need to do a bit of both. I mean, I think the fabric first approach to new house building has to be the priority. I think developing social tariffs for islanders is essential as well. I think picking up the point that Robert made in relation to the success of area-based schemes at the moment, I think Orkney has demonstrated its ability to roll those out and make good use of the funds that are available. Unfortunately, the way that that system is operated, there are other local authorities that are not using those resources, and they're not then coming back into a point of being able to be used by places like Orkney, who could certainly scale up the operation. And therefore that resource is being wasted in terms of addressing fuel poverty across the board. So I think there's been some progress made in terms of at least accepting the definition around fuel poverty is different in rural and island areas to the rest of the country. But since that Fuel Poverty Act, I don't think we've seen the strides taken forward. It's not helped obviously by what we're seeing in terms of fuel costs overall by global conflicts and the like. But nevertheless, I think we are going to have to do both, which is retrofit into existing housing stock, making sure the stock that we're building, both public and private, is of a far higher standard, but also introducing means of social tariffs that allow those who are paying those bills to find them more affordable.
Thanks very much. Just to kind of follow up first on some of the things that have been raised already. It was interesting talking about social tariffs, because we held a meeting which involved SSE coming along, who were very negative about the potential. In fact, said that it was almost impossible to create social tariffs, particularly for those in certain communities, which I don't think highlights the difficulty. I think it highlights the reluctance from some of the energy companies. And that's certainly something that I found, I'm sure Liam has found in his work as at MSP, that actually energy companies are very reluctant to move people off the more expensive tariffs, because there's no benefit to them. We've also had a real concern, a real issue around smart meters actually not working, and particularly for those people who would probably benefit most. And of course, even if you probably all get inundated by people saying to get a smart meter, you actually try and book a smart meter installation, it's almost impossible. Almost they're sending somebody from the south of France or somewhere to do it. It seems that tricky at times. Just on the homes angle, I think we've got to recognise that not all homes are easily retrofitted, and particularly in a community like ours, it can be extremely expensive and actually doesn't lead to the some of the improvements that we want to see. So that has to be recognised by government. I think there's been too many schemes which do try and increase efficiency or put in additional heating. But actually, it's quite a complicated landscape. So if you're looking to try and see where the access, if you're a private individual trying to look at where the support comes from, it's not easy. It's not always an easy landscape to actually navigate to find where that support comes. It's not helped, of course, by a government that doesn't always understand what it's like living in an island community like ours or remote rural communities. And I think some of the work that had to be done in reversing the ban on wood burning stoves was a pretty good example of that. It's all right having these initiatives which say you must have this and you must have that. When you're trying to retrofit this stuff into a property at huge amounts of cost, and it's not actually going to deliver what you need when you're in an emergency situation, we need government to be a little bit aware of that. On the transport side, well, part of the issue around the new ferries that we had was this desperation to make it more fuel efficient. I've dealt quite heavily with the Corran Narrows crossing, where tens of millions of pounds is being spent on 2 electric ferries, when actually what the community needs, genuinely for the sustainability of their community, is a new ferry as soon as possible. They don't care whether it's whether it's going to be energy efficient or not. They just need it for their area. So when we are looking to make these improvements, we've got to recognise what is the impact of delay sometimes on those communities, because there's certainly places out in Ardnamurchan, if they don't get a ferry and they don't get the ferry in the next few years, and it's unlikely if it's going to be an electrical ferry, that those communities won't be sustainable going forward.
Okay, thank you. Question at the back of the floor, and then I'll come to Gareth or somebody.
Thanks very much. My name's Ian Mackay. I'm a relatively newcomer here, and I must congratulate OREF for the work that they're doing in that. I want to ask a question which is both about your ability to be a local MFP, but also to play a part locally, since I think it's something that Orkney always have to worry about. For the last 6 months, I've been heading up a bid, which is trying to build a framework of fast charging points across Scotland and the UK to allow us to decarbonise HGVs, because that's the missing link at the moment to make big HGV electrical vehicles actually affordable for people and able to be worked. Now, it's relatively easy to see where that is going to work if you are in a high density population. It's much more difficult to see how it's going to work the more rural that you become. And the real question then is, how would you, as a local MSP, be trying to use your influence to make sure that that grid, when it is built, and I hope it will be built, is actually coming all the way up here and over the water, so that people here are getting the benefits of electric HGVs the same as everybody else?
Thank you. Who wants to take that one first? Jamie, you've got the...
I've got it here. It's great that we've got these wonderful mics, but we can't get poor Neil even like a ping pong paddle or something like that. That's the way his paper is. I think that's a really good point. I mean, one of the issues that's come up again and again and again is how we actually decarbonize or create progress on that side, the freight and the haulage side. The Haulage Association were in Parliament only last week talking about some of these sorts of things as well. I mean, I'm certainly very supportive of that. And should I be fortunate enough to be re-elected, whichever way after May the 7th, then I would be very willing to meet with you and chat with you about that. One of the cautions I have is that we still haven't delivered that for normal vehicles yet. And I was speaking to somebody only today, I advised to somebody only today who was struggling to get from Orkney. They've just left Orkney down to where they're now living, and they couldn't get down because they couldn't get the charging sites to work on the A9. And every time somebody hears a story like that, that little bit of confidence goes. But I think it's a really interesting area, and particularly for somebody who's involved in farming as well, how we create opportunities within that sector as well. It is I would say the holy grail, but it's certainly not far off. But happy to kind of discuss further with you.
Yeah, likewise, I think that's an excellent point. I think the lesson from the implementation of the existing charging network for low emissions vehicles points to the fact that it's not just a numbers game. It's not just about the number of chargers you have, it's the type of chargers. But equally, the arrangements for ensuring that those are maintained and repaired. And as we've seen more recently, how people have access to them even when they are working. And I think in those latter 2 points, while the network at times hasn't looked just terribly bad. I mean, if you compare it to rollout of the network in places like the Netherlands, we are miles behind. But nevertheless, the network that on the face of it doesn't look too bad. But we've got the wrong charges too often in the wrong place. They're not serviced and repaired. And we've now got a system where we've moved away from Charge Place Scotland to another model, and all hell is breaking loose. So those that weren't having problems now suddenly find that they are having problems. I think the point you make in terms of the next stage, in terms of HGVs, it's obvious, but let's, for goodness sake, learn the lessons from what has already happened in terms of the rollout of the network. And I think it is absolutely clear that you can't do this from a kind of outside in. I'm not sure necessarily you could, sorry, from the inside out. I'm not sure necessarily you can do it from the outside in, but you need to be bloody sure that the infrastructure you're putting in place supports the rollout and supports HGVs wherever they may be, including rural and island areas.
Well, when you think of infrastructure, you do have to think quite carefully. One assumption everybody has made is that electric is the way forward. Now, if oil stays at $150 or whatever it ends up at for a few years, it's possible we may be looking at hydrogen again. And, there are vehicles powered by hydrogen on the roads, even bin lorries in the Western Isles, I understand. Now, it's going to take a lot of joined up thinking to get the necessary networks together and in an organised way. And I'm not entirely encouraged by what the two gentlemen there have had to say. They're seeing it from the inside in the Scottish Parliament. And we can only hope that things will get better, whenever the next government comes in. I would add, if you think electric, you have to think of disposal of the batteries in the vehicles as they come to their end, and that needs investment there. And has that been considered? Recycling facilities in Scotland? Food for thought there.
Thanks for your question, Ian. And could I just check you maybe have that knowledge that did I hear right somewhere today that about 10% of HGVs are now electric? Could it be a higher number or something? No. But no, yeah. But anyway, if we're talking about the charging network, and I heard what Liam said about the transfer that we're undergoing now, and I've got experience of that. Having negotiated to try and get rid of 3 charging points that we have, and it's a case of far more local control probably needed, and that procurement question that's in there too is, if we had a bit more agency and a bit more control over what network, that would be an easier way to organise that. If we need a network of better charging points for HPV, and I'm talking about, and I'm thinking also about the agriculture sector, but bigger partners and things like that, that we're going to have to support. And having that local control here would certainly be a benefit. Sense I would think.
Yeah. So just for a chair's prerogative, everybody who actually owns an EV here put their hands up. It'll be interesting to see what the candidates do with their hands. So everybody that's got an EV, can you put your hands up, please? Yeah, so maybe roughly half of the people. Yeah. I've got heat pumps. We've just finished about who's got a heat pump that's in the room. And then what about solar, battery, or wind? So some renewable source. Yeah. It just shows that it's a knowledgeable audience you've got, and I think that HGV question is really important, and we've been dealing with it, in our work as well. So maybe more of an interest in the bloody question. Right. We'll move on to another question. There's one at the back, and then I'll come to you, Gareth, because I know that she's got to leave early. So.
Thank you, gentlemen, for coming. I say gentlemen quite advisedly. There's not many of us females in the room. But anyway, that's another matter. I'm just going back to housing, and we're talking about retrofitting houses or building new houses with top-notch energy conservation measures. What are your thoughts that when we do this, we then, either on the sale of the house or when we build the house, we then get bumped to council tax bands? So maybe it's just not worth bothering and just swallow the electricity bills rather than bump up to the higher the higher council tax band, which is a significant increase from, say, a B to a D, just because it's a better house with good insulation and double glazed windows.
Robert, the housing.
I come in for the social rented sector, and I don't think anybody will be surprised that when I'm seeing, folk living in work, very well insulated houses, high energy efficiency houses, and still struggling. That I don't think this is a route that I would want to go down and feel is regressive. And I would far rather scale up the energy efficiency across the board with maybe targeted support for less energy efficient properties so that we can close the gap that exists now. Because as much as we're putting our hands up when we've got heat pump and lots of renewable bling, there's a lot of folk out there that don't and can't take advantage of that. I've already made the case to the Cabinet Secretary for Housing that Orkney and other island authorities should have more power over resources to tackle fuel poverty, but there's no reason why we shouldn't have used any additional resources that we can build up for that to pull in locally to ensure that we have a far more robust supply chain than we do at present, because that's a big gap that we have still in terms of speeding up energy efficiency work, regardless of how much money we throw at it. But yeah, going up. Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's just a hit that folk are going to have to take. But I certainly wouldn't want to see folk that are further doing that energy efficiency picking on the feeling that they're being penalised because they're still paying big bills and they're still paying big electricity bills alongside it. Because as much as you can build on your renewables, if you've got the PV and battery and you've got your EV and all, you're bringing down your energy costs. So that gap between the energy rich and energy poor in Orkney that I'd like to see closed.
Okay, well, council tax, I do have to be very realistic. Kate Forbes was born around the time the council tax was set up. There's never been a revaluation because people have become gradually more and more scared of winners and losers. Now, the current estimate is about 30% of householders live in a house that's overvalued, 30% live in a house that's undervalued on the current council tax system. Revaluation would be necessary, but nobody wants to do it, and you cannot go with the present system. It's a disaster. If you kept bans, everybody would be, well, 60% of the population would be screaming one way or another about it. I would say, let's look abroad to Germany and Holland. They carry out revaluations quite easily because they rely on online property valuation services, I suppose like Purple Bricks and such like here. They carry out revaluations quite happily and get their council tax or the equivalent of it sorted, and people seem quite happy. I think personally the only way to go is to use that and use a percentage of the house value. This does not mean automatically massive increases. If you think of Edinburgh, property prices have increased so much there that the average council tax is something like 0.4% of the property value on average. You look at the west coast of Scotland, where property prices may well have stagnated, and you'll find it's getting up towards 1%. So it's a poison, a can of worms, really, and adding energy efficiency ratings into any revaluation, that isn't going to happen. Sorry about that.
Okay. Thanks. I think Mike, to some extent, puts his finger on part of the fundamental problem here is a council tax system that has long ceased to be fit for purpose, and just making adjustments to it is going to create all sorts of either unintended consequences or consequences that are not supporting the sorts of decisions you want householders to make. I mean, it should be noted that when the SNP government came in 2007, it was on a commitment to reform the council tax, and indeed when they froze the council tax over a number of years, which I think we're still living with the consequences of that in terms of local government funding, that was in order to have a steady state while they took forward the reform of the council tax, and we've had neither. I think part of the reason I'm a little bit sceptical about the point in the manifesto about disincentives within the council tax system is that just layering more onto a system that is fundamentally broken is not helpful. I think there's a wider though point about the financial mechanisms that are there to support the capital outlay that householders and businesses are expected to make. I think the expectation of the return on that is often far too short, and that unless you've got a system that's supporting a bit more patience in the investment, providing additional support, and the payback periods are longer, I think we're not going to get the level of investment we need, whether it's by householders, whether it's by businesses. And at the moment, there are too many. You've pointed to one example of why on earth would you do it, because it's going to penalise me. To some extent, the initiatives we've seen to date have rested a little bit on people doing it because they feel it's the right thing to do. But I don't think now that we've done probably most of the easy stuff, we can expect that to continue going forward.
Yeah, thanks very much. I mean, I think there are three issues there, and I'll start with the issue which was the original question, which I think Liam was talking about there. I mean, in a scenario or in a time when we actually want people to take more responsibility for their own energy use, their consumption, and how they do it, it is frustrating that people are being penalised for doing that. Not that you're being looking to be rewarded, but actually being penalised on top of that. So I very much take that on board, and I think that's something that should possibly looked at. Is it a question of doing it through revaluation or some other way like that? I mean, the experience of all revaluations recently, and particularly around business rates, has been people have seen their bills increase. So I'm not sure, and as Liam rightly points out, I mean, the council tax has been promised to have been got rid of for some time now. There hasn't been a change because undoubtedly it's a lot more complicated to do that, but probably changing things on top of a system that most people, I think, understand doesn't work as it should do is probably not the way forward. In terms of the manifesto kind of offering, which is around perhaps rewarding households if they have a higher EPC rating and having lower bills. Yeah, I find that very difficult because there are many people that would disadvantage because they simply live in properties that they will never be able to take advantage of through no fault of their own. They may live in larger houses or older houses or properties that they're just simply not able to be to have a particularly high EPC rating. So I'd be very cautious before I looked at an approach like that.
Okay, thank you. Right, Gara.
Yeah, I think we've had quite a lot of analysis of maybe some of the problems in the energy sector, and we've talked quite a lot in generality, but maybe we haven't talked specifically about Orkney particularly. And we had GB Energy up here last week, and we were able to share with them some data which showed that on average in Orkney, a household spends 25% of its disposable income on energy. And that's the second highest in the UK after the Scilly Isles. And it compares to a kind of Middle England figure of about 5%. And to me, this is the nub of it, that we have an energy system that's governed by averages. When we listen to the news, we get told the energy cap is going to be X. And as we know, that's a hypothetical middle of the UK figure, which is on average. And in Orkney, we have to double that number to make it relevant. I think if the newsreader had said the price cap was going to be £4,600, there'd probably be riots on the streets. But in Kirkland and Stromness and other islands, there's no riots. So we're expected to accept a reality which is totally different to other places. And it seems to me, therefore, in the energy space, we need to get a bit antsy and draw weight around a bit and start to talk to people about the reality of place-based energy economics. This is getting into quite a long question, but I just wonder if we could reflect on how do we actually get the attention of system to enable us to make the changes. All of these changes require quite radical different thinking. So how do we achieve that radical different thinking and get people to listen to us?
This must be very frustrating for Liam, because if he was doing his DPO job in Parliament, he'd have cut you off aggressively and unfairly before now, as I've experienced many, many times. But I think it's a really good point. I mean, one of the reasons, Gareth, I started up the cross-body group on islands was to try and get a better understanding from MSP colleagues of some of the issues and the challenges and the differences that we face. And they're not just challenges, they're unique challenges. They're places, they're challenges that other areas don't face. And actually, on what was a very long session about housing, energy consumption was one of the things that came up again and again and again. It's not just Orkney, it's island communities right across the country, and there was a great deal of frustration, not only from islanders but also some of the organisation involved in island communities, because there was a kind of acceptance that we're going to pay more. When I was up in Shetland, did a surgery, and I actually had somebody from the council come along. And I said, well, what can I help the council with? It says, we're trying to get out to people to talk to them about fuel poverty. Because if we send them a leaflet, they say, well, I'm not fuel poor, I'm just paying a fuel bill. It's that recognition that we actually do pay a lot more, and that we don't need to, because you only have to walk out of here and walk a little bit down, you'll see wind turbines, and the same in Shetland. And I think this is one of the great frustrations, that we are playing a pivotal role within energy generation, but that's just flowing across the top of us down pylons all the way south. And that's why I think one of the parts of our offerings that we're at this election is that it's that local control. Because I think if there is more local control and more local say, local communities will be able to extract more benefit out of those energy companies. So instead of something being forced through by council or by the energy consent unit in Edinburgh, which we want to get rid of, they'll actually have to work with those local communities and able to and actually, actually be able to deliver for those local communities as they should be now.
Yeah, I think part of the issues around the decentralisation that forms a large part of the manifesto. I mean, I spent yesterday in Northern Hornsey, where I quite rightly got my ear bent about generators having to be used because of the frailty of the cable supporting the ferry-linked dials, that had then resulted in everybody having to turn off the turbines, so the loss of feed-in tariffs. And any benefit they were getting in reduced bills as a result. So the fragility is there, and I think a more decentralised model where there is more control exercised locally. I think to some extent where I probably part ways a bit with Jamie is that this is not about stopping the development of the infrastructure that's necessary to support the transition. It's about making sure that the benefit of that transition is felt more locally. I think the community benefit provisions that have been put in place by the Scottish Government, again, have not been revised at all over recent years, and therefore are worth considerably less than they were. And there are those that would argue that they should be considerably higher. But it's not just about that financial input; it's the extent to which the jobs it's creating, the capital infrastructure investment that goes into a retrofit program that you can't rely on householders or businesses to do on their own. It needs to be supported by the sorts of investment that only comes by having a greater degree of control. I know there's a frustration about regulators like Ofgem and their kind of worldview. I think there's a job of work to be done there. I would say that there's been a reasonable amount of getting up in their grill, but it seems to be a question of 2 steps forward and then probably 2, if not 3 steps back. There's not been the progress made in terms of understanding that if this is a transition you want to see, you need to will the means, and willing the means allowing places like Orkney and other island areas to fulfil their potential in delivering it. So, I mean, I don't think there's an easy solution to it, but I think breaking it down to a more decentralised model where greater control is exercised here would at least ensure that more of the decisions that are taken fit our needs and circumstances.
Now, this is the point where I might have some new information for you. It seems generally common knowledge in the Western Isles that Western Isles Council some time ago had in-depth discussions with Ofgem to see whether it would be possible to have a local local retail company, basically owned by the council. Ofgem, it is understood, is agreeable in principle because the Western Isles, like Orkney and Shetland, has a very clearly defined geographical extent. Ofgem would not want to consider this for the Scottish mainland because you would have one local authority, setting up a company, getting it running, offering lower prices, but in the next door postcode, that isn't happening. It would basically, Ofgem would only consider it for island groupings or something very similar. Now, we all know that Western Isles Council is skint and it's not basically going to do it, or if it does, it will be a great surprise. But Orkney and Shetland, with their better financial position, could theoretically look at this. Now, the source familiar with the matter, who I discussed this with some years ago, reckoned they could possibly be offering electricity at 50% off. There's a big financial commitment, a lot involved in it, but it is theoretically possible. And I'd be very interested, and this is me actually asking a question, has Orkney Council got in on these sort of discussions?
Paris, a local energy company, I think we've been there and looked at that in the past. I do, and if it's purely retail, which is what the Scottish Government keeps on being accused of, saying that they were going to set up a publicly owned energy company, it was going to be a retail company. It would have gone the same way as Our Power, which was a housing association set up, not-for-profit energy company that tried its best to get that foothold in the market by offering competitive tariffs for THTC-style tariffs and other, and failed, in that market. What we really need is ownership around that, is ownership of generation rather than just being a retail company. And under the Scotland Act, I think local authorities in Scotland are the only folk that can actually set up energy companies. The Scottish Government prohibited by to own generation. It can own, I think, heat is something that they can do. But I would just go back to the point that I made right away. If we're trying to catch the eye of anybody, telling the UK government that on the first day of the new SNP government, John Swinney will be demanding power over energy to be transferred to the Scottish Parliament so that we can get on with the job of bringing down bills, could be catching their eye. And I think Kemi Badenoch already said that, she's trying to pour storm on that. But, having dealt with Ofgem over the years, having had them up here, having met with them as part of the Rural and Island Real Poverty Action Group that I'm part of, we were starting to make inroads with
Thanks, Robert. Can I just ask a follow-up question of the guy? So, we did have a manifesto here about Ofgem, and it does say that the Scottish Parliament is supposed to scrutinise Ofgem. Have you guys that have been MSPs, have anyone seen the Scottish Parliament scrutinising any of the changes that Ofgem have decided to make? And it's be interesting, Robert's bit there as well. It's fine that they've come there, but Parliament should have some control and should be able to debate that. It follows on from the Scotland Act, like we should be seeing more of the Scotland Act being debated in Parliament. But lots of things go, somebody said earlier that things are done to us and we don't have that control, and you're all talking about local control. But one of the things the Scottish Parliament should do is scrutinise Ofgem. And that's where OREF would like to sit. We, as other people have done, we've battled with Ofgem as companies, as groups and everything for many years. So is there any feedback on that, guys, that you're in the Parliament when you go?
I think there's engagement with Ofgem and indeed with NISO through various events. I mean, I'm not aware of formal hearings within the Net Zero Committee or can't think who else would have a locus in it that have done kind of formal evidence sessions with Ofgem over the years. I'd be interested to know the parameters of where the parliamentary oversight of Ofgem would be, but there's certainly a value in having somebody at the end of the table who's getting grilled and knows they're going to get grilled on an annual basis. I mean, I think there are other areas where Parliament hasn't as yet had exercised its oversight function in the way that it might. I'm thinking of various office holders, public ombudsman, and the like. So there's more of a role that it can take on there. As I say, I would be interested to know the extent to which that there is a kind of statutory provision there that, as a result of that oversight, Ofgem is then required to do something. But as I say, I mean, NISO have certainly been more active in the Parliament over the last couple of years, proactively, which is helpful. GB Energy has had more of a profile again in probably in the last 6 to 12 months. But again, I'm not aware of either of those appearing before Net Zero or one of the other relevant subject committees.
Yeah, I've not got a huge amount to add to that. It would be in front of committee. I would imagine. I mean, certainly in the committee I sit on, Constitution Committee and Culture, we are very keen to get anybody's in and make sure that if we've got a scrutiny role, we do that, because we've seen with a number of bodies what happens when you don't scrutinise them and you don't ask the questions. So I would imagine that's gone through that committee. I would also I used to be a member of the Economy Committee, which covered partly energy. We did a visit up to Orkney a number of years ago to talk about reflex and some of the areas around that. Whether there is a wider role as well for some of the other areas that Ofgem's work impacts or doesn't impact, should do. I'm not sure if any of the other kind of wider committees will have played a part in that. But I think the scrutiny is absolutely vital. Part of the problem is actually a lot of the stuff coming through committees, because they are decided by the committee members themselves, and there's party politics involved there. There isn't always the time to do the full scrutiny that you need to. I'm not saying in this case, But that is one area that I would have concern over, that actually, because it may or may not have been a priority for the people on that committee, whether what happened to the extent that it needed to. I've always been in favour of getting people in as much as possible to make sure they're being held to account.
Thank you. Any other questions from the floor? Gareth's got another one. Yeah, you can. Nobody else.
So I'm laughing because there's a line that somebody said at the weekend, which I'm maybe going to quote at the end. So obviously we're here today talking about renewables and the transition from oil to renewables, and maybe as a couple of people have quoted or spoken to, there's maybe been a bit of rolling back from those renewables commitments, and some of the things that were said before the last election, we got rolled back, and things have come to pass. And I think I've heard a number of times people say it's difficult to do this, it's difficult to do that. Have we got time to do this? Have we got time to do that? And I'm sitting here thinking that we might be about to go to war in the Gulf to try and secure the Gulf of Hormuz so that we can get Qatari gas into our gas system, plus all the other stuff that goes with it. It looks like from reports that the Ukrainians are being asked to stop bombing Russian oil infrastructure because allegedly that's going to make the prices go up. And like the scale of the mess that we're in because of oil is nothing compared to putting electric ferries on or investing in grid infrastructure or making sure that when we go to a car charger, again, I was reflecting like car chargers. Has anybody ever been and charged their car with a covered car charger with a bit of shelter? I don't think I've ever done it. So why is it we can go and fill up at a petrol station and get, covered and all of those facilities, but the way we've rolled out electrical infrastructure is like it's for the peasants. And this is where I think we need to get serious about this. We need to start campaigning for a level playing field to put energy transition. I think most of us buy into the fact that it's not a luxury, it's a necessity. And if you look at the consequences of going down the old system, we become beholden to the Orange Man and people like that. So how do we wrest back control? And again, I come back to this thing, how do we get an urgency and a commitment? Because like the fact that we've got somebody in the UK saying drill baby drill, and expecting that to be a solution where the difference between exploration and delivery of oil is probably 10 years. So we've got two parties now that are sitting on a mandate saying, well, we're going to take 10 years to get the first of our new solution out. That's crazy. So how do we start addressing those realities? And it's not because it's difficult, because the whole world is very, very difficult at the moment.
You give these two guys a chat, and you had the last guys. Yeah, when you go, mate, you go first. Yeah,
Right. In terms of a positive, at least Labour can be said to be the most renewables friendly of the major parties. I mean, I appreciate obviously the Greens will come into the equation as well. Now, just coming back to my leaflet, I did boast a little bit about the AR7 auction, where in the offshore wind auction, the contract for difference, Labour secured 8.4 gigawatts of energy, offshore wind energy, at a price which at the time was equivalent to 40% lower than the cost of gas power generation. Now, the price of gas power generation is your imagination at the moment, so that is a really good deal and is the way we're going. But coming back to my comment about repeating the 1970s, we do realize that the whole system with the pricing structure being based on the last energy of unit, which is typically gas and therefore more expensive, that is geared towards the needs of the investors in offshore wind. It enables them to get a fair amount of profit. So you have to bear in mind that system isn't going to change whatever government is in power, except in the scenario where reform get in. And then we don't know what's going to happen. So that's enough of a stream of consciousness rant from me. So
yeah, it's a big question. The other week, somebody punted it across me, which it's an HM government national security assessment on global biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and national security. Look, hardly anybody's heard of that. I think it appeared as an editorial, maybe in one paper in the middle of England somewhere, and it doesn't really get spoken about in the mainstream media because knowing the interest of the billionaire owner so that were newspapers and the wider media and let us know what's happening there. And while we're calling candidate go here tonight, that tells its own story because they will use disinformation, misinformation, and division to spread that message. And I'm afraid that it gets swallowed up by folk that maybe don't go and do the analysis that's needed. And, we're on the back foot unless we can really get that message across. And as somebody that used to be in the media, I can see how it works, because bombardment on that negative message the whole time, and it gets a foothold. And when you're on the door and when you're on street stalls, as we've been, you get the headline quoted back at you, So, what is this net zero crap? It really doesn't help when previous Tory governments at Westminster have, lost the bottle. David Cameron did it, Richie Sunak did it. I spoke to folk at the Science Festival last year. He said, if you've got a UK government that's undermining your effort and you're on a trade mission to the Far East, to try and get investment in the way, and they turn around and say, why should we be backing you when your own government doesn't? These are the things we need to have, leadership on that, and we're not seeing that at the moment. And, I'm giving you the option there. We need one. If there's any reason for independence, getting energy security and along with it, I would want to mention food security too, because in an agricultural community like Orkney, where farmers are really struggling with input costs at the moment, I think there's a link between where huge amount of valuable renewable generation and getting food security onto the agenda too, because I think the local authority had a meeting with Tim Lang when he was here. There might be going to be, I think there's a report coming to committee around what we might be able to do around that. So I think while we're talking about renewable energy here broadly, if we can make sure that we're farming community, we're food producer on a more even footing, going into some of these crises, we're looking at.
Yeah, thanks, Robert.
That sounded suspiciously like taking back control, and we know where that's taken us before. I think, I said earlier, we've done the easy stuff. Chris Stark, the former chief executive of the UK Climate Change Committee, suggested that politicians had gone through the sugar rush phase in setting targets. They were now in the buyer's regret phase of having to deliver them. And I think one of the problems we've seen, and this can be levelled as much as at the Scottish Government as it can at successive UK governments, is the targets are all very well, but if you do not have an action plan and pathways in order to deliver that, then you're dealing in a world of fantasy. And actually, we've got in a debate where not so long ago, I think there was an acceptance across the parties, not just in net zero, but actually achieving that would require demand reduction rather than simply saying we need to stop oil and gas now and we need to put in place renewables now. I think that the transition was accepted as being something that in some sectors would happen more quickly than in others. But if you look at actually the difference between what the Greens on the one hand and the Tories had been arguing for in relation to oil and gas in the North Sea, it was 2 or 3% of difference. I mean, the geological reality is that if we are still reliant on oil and gas to any extent by 2050, we will be importing it. So I think this gets back to the answer to your earlier question, Gareth. What we're seeing at the moment should act as an accelerant for what we need to see, but accelerating something that just locks in a system that doesn't seem to benefit the communities that are most directly impacted. We're not seeing the job creation, you're not seeing the wealth creation, you're not seeing the kind of sustained long-term benefit to communities, not just island and rural communities. I mean, places like the northeast, which are hurting at the moment because, in a sense, they see themselves at the forefront of that transition. And other parts of central Scotland as well, where just because they're larger, more urban areas doesn't mean the effect on them in terms of areas of real poverty and deprivation, that this is a real challenge for them. That challenge will need to be met in a way that brings people along with them. But as I say, I think unless we get a handle on a more decentralised model, have an understanding of community benefit, building resilience, and ensuring that those who are least able to afford this transition are cushioned to some extent, to a greater extent, then essentially all we're going to see is more of a public pushback against something which ultimately we all understand to be in our collective interest as well as their interest. But as I say, I think we've been very good at setting the targets and making the promises. What we've not been good at is setting out the detailed action of how on earth we achieve those.
Thanks very much. I mean, during the COVID pandemic and some of the years since, I mean, we only had to have one little container ship stuck in the Suez Canal and everything stopped in terms of supply. We always talked about resilience and how we need to be more resilient. And part of resilience is preparing for the changing world and the transition that we know is coming. But I don't think it's a question of where we'll be in 2050. I mean, the issues around oil and gas is that the chance are we will still be reliant on oil and gas to some extent in 10 years' time and 15 years' time. And so making decisions now on how we extract what we've got within our own with our own basin and using that, making sure that we've got those supplies for our own usage, I think is very important. In this room, there are probably many people here that I think we highlighted will have renewable sources. Out there, most people or a lot of people are still relying on heating oil, which we've obviously seen the issues that's happening over that. I don't think it's an either or. I think we need to be able to do both. One caution I would say is in the movement towards, if we want to become totally reliant on renewables, where are they being produced? Because certainly a lot of renewables is now being produced in China. Now, we don't know what the global situation is going to involve in China in the future. One thing I would like to see, and it was certainly something that came up time and time again on the economy committee, is how we start to produce more here across all sectors, so that actually we don't have these long supply chains. We're not reliant on boats getting through the Suez Canal or production, because it causes real issues. We saw it only a few years ago when we couldn't get a tractor part because it was coming from China. Now, if that part's coming for somebody's heating system or an important part of a wider generation process, we are still going to be in the same situation. We're going to be relying on another country essentially producing or helping, making sure that we can produce the energy we need. So I think we need a really honest look where we're going to be in the next 10, 15, 20 years before we even start looking at 2050 and beyond.
Okay, thank you. We've probably got time for one more question, given we've got 4 different people to go around. Has anybody got one? Neil's got one if nobody else does. Okay, Neil.
Thanks. Just to make a couple of points, the Committee on Climate Change just produced a report, I think 2 weeks ago, which showed that the total cost of getting to net zero will be less than the cost shock that we had as a result of the Ukraine war starting. Total cost, it's net zero. So the point is, it's an investment issue. To answer a point that was made earlier about who will pay, the answer is it's us. It's always us. Because government get their money from us, or we pay it through our bills, or it is us. So we need to recognise that we are going to pay for it. The point is that we can defer those costs or spread those by clever financial means. But at the end of the day, it's always us that pays. So I'm just interested to know what the candidates are going to do, because we've heard a lot about the problems, but I'd like to know what you would actually do if you were elected. what you would actually do to seek to make sure that energy is more affordable for the people in Orkney?
Well, as I said, I think there is an energy transition happening. We are going to see more from renewables. We are obviously going to still need an energy mix. Some of the areas which I've talked about here, which is I think about allowing local communities to have more say and therefore being able to extract more out of developers. I would actually, I think there's potential for more groups in a community, particularly like us, to come together and be able to supply locally. And I think some of the areas of concern about that, and I think we highlighted that were highlighted earlier, they're not insurmountable issues. I think we need to be realistic about one. I mean, we have a system at the moment that basically says we want energy as cheaply as possible. So, but we subsidize essentially in some areas. But we also want it to be as cheap as possible. People, therefore, not always conserve as much as they should. We don't, I think, have a clear approach. I want to see a far clearer approach in terms of support for households and how that they can deliver it. As I highlighted before, there are a myriad of schemes out there that will help reduce, put in insulation or do this. Actually, the public find it very hard to be signposted to that, and they don't always have confidence in that it's not a scam. I was at an event with the owner of and a founder and owner of a quite a large solar company, and he said one of their biggest issues is when they turn up on the door and knock on the door when they're doing door-to-door sales, whatever they happen to do it, is people don't believe they're going to get the money back off it. They think it's a scam. So I think we need a far clearer approach, both with households essentially as well, so that actually those that are available to have help are able to get it. But I think that requires, as I say, a lot more clarity, perhaps from the government and from local government as well, of how you actually provide that advice and that support, and to make sure people are able to have confidence in taking some of these schemes forward.
I think in terms of community benefit, we're beyond the community halls and flower baskets. I think we need to see that delivering infrastructure. I mean, we're in the midst of a housing crisis as well. It seems to me there's an obvious link between using the transition to help us address both new housing stock, but also existing housing stock. I think also we have the powers available to do things differently in terms of the way we go about procurement. I think there's been a drive to go down the route of saving money through framework contracts and securing best value. I'm not sure necessarily that is securing best value, certainly not in the medium to longer term. And somewhere like Orkney, I think what we're seeing is a loss of that value to the islands, even if it's retained more generally within Scotland. I think there is much was made of the Islands Act. I'm not sure it has done anything other than disappoint. It's raised expectations, as I pointed out to Hamza Youssef as he was taking it through the Parliament, that it would because of some of the rhetoric around it. But I think if it needs amending in order to be beefed up and have teeth added to it, then that's what we need to do. Because I think what we've seen in so many instances is that actually the general drive of policy isn't necessarily wrong, but by applying an approach that may work perfectly well in large parts of mainland Scotland to an island setting like Orkney, we are creating all sorts of perversions and perverse incentives and disincentives. We need an approach that allows us to use the resources, the skills, etc., that we have here to lock in more of that value for here. So whether that's in terms of householders, whether that's in terms of businesses or the community as a whole. We've been at the forefront in terms of renewables. We're not yet seeing the value of that across the community. So there will be different ways of achieving that in different areas. And Ian was talking earlier about HTVs. I mean, there are so many moving parts to this. But I think what we do have to our benefit is we have a cluster of individuals, organisations, and businesses that are not lacking in ideas about how you address it. Will we get all of them right all of the time? Absolutely not. Nobody does. But as I say, you learn as much from the things that don't necessarily go right as you do from the things that do.
Well, some good news, at least, of course, from Labour. On the Scottish Policy Forum, one of my last duties was negotiating a particular policy item, basically giving communities, could be councils, the right to buy into new renewable developments, like you have in Denmark, where they would, as of right, be able to buy in 20% of the project cost. And that is a very useful scheme in Denmark. If Labour gets in and implements it here, that could be very helpful. We've already seen, incidentally, in the Western Isles, the benefit of the various community-owned schemes there. The money generated is quite substantial. Point and Sandwich Trust, with 3 smallish turbines, have generated as much in community benefit as the big Whiteleys, or whatever it's called, farm, the largest onshore one in Scotland, near Glasgow. So once you get ownership, and Orkney, with its financial reserves, is in a better place than most councils, to try and buy into that. I'm just saying the possibilities are there. Now, just very quickly, I do want to quickly mention tunnels. They might not have immediate energy implications, but they do. You think about it. A tunnel is 10 meters wide. If you want a dual carriage road, it's about 6 meters wide. That leaves space for ducting on either side. It could be used to carry an internet connection, could be used to carry electricity connection. And instead of having a legacy attitude of we must connect an island by laying a cable in the sea, which is very difficult to maintain, if we go for the tunnel, that could well be a cheaper option longer term, subject always to geology. Just a thought. And that'll be in the Arcadian, I think it's next week.
Okay, I think the original question was around bringing down energy prices. So I think I've said it at least twice that we've already got a plan for bringing down energy prices once we get back in. I don't know if everybody's read, that paper. It was produced last year by the SNP. I've sent out press releases locally. I think maybe the Orkney News picked up on it, and that was it. Hannah Mary Goodlad was doing presenting that paper. She's got a background that a lot of folk are kenning the corporate side of Equinor in Norway, very knowledgeable on the energy side. I'd say a very different, frontline support area where, as I've said earlier, we're not getting the traction that we need to bring down energy prices at all. What we're called, the Gillian Martin wrote to have the opposite number at Westminster asking for a gas equivalent tariff, because at the moment we can see electricity is about 4 times the price of a unit of gas. And, we're coming up against a system that basically consistently lacks the political will to remove the barrier sort of standing in our way when we want to bring down costs. It's a numbers game. I've said that in the past, that even when we try to equalise the costs across the UK, the Central Belt weren't interested. I was actually heartened the day to see Fraser Scott, the Chief Executive of Energy Act in Scotland, having a bit of a go on LinkedIn about marginal pricing and questioning whether that really, moving away from that really would be a disincentive for investment. Yeah, like I said, the Scottish Government plan would be to take energy into our control, and we would be lowering household bills, we would be having meaningful community benefit, would be boosting productivity and competitiveness and economic growth by the changes that would make, by decoupling, the gas and the price of electricity to gas, because that's untenable at the moment, and it was being discussed on the radio this morning. I think how quickly they could actually do that through the Parliament, and it's great that they're thinking about it now, but we've been telling them that they needed to do that for a long, long time.
Okay, folks, I think that's an hour and a half I've gone through. So it just falls to me to thank the candidates. I think that's probably the most sort of benign and easy manifesto, hustings that we've ever had. There was hardly a disagreement anywhere. Everybody agreed with everybody, so that's great. So you're agreeing with the manifesto. One point I would quite like both of the two MSPs said at the beginning that, you know, they liked the manifesto, disagreed with some points. They didn't come out and tell us which points exactly they disagreed with. So I would like, from an OREF point of view, if we could get feedback from all four candidates on the manifesto, which bits you agree with and which bits you don't, so that then, as I said at the beginning, we can hold you to account, whoever gets in. We want to be able to come in a few years' time and stand here and say, this is what you agreed and this is what we want. It's really really useful for us. All of you were saying about local control, you want to see more local control. Well, we are, as you saw with the hands went up and the people in the room and wider, you know, we are the local people. OREF, as far as energy is concerned, people that we are taking into this place, they really understand energy. We want to see that you know, the stuff that we've agreed in this manifesto is taken forward, and hopefully you've got that sort of baked in. So it would be good if we can get, if there's bits you disagree with, that's good for us to know as well, and we can't do that. So I am going to close it there. I think we should give everybody a round of applause. That was very well mannered. Everybody kept the time. Thanks for Neil for making sure they did.